My name is Trudy Murphy Dowd, and I live in Carmel Valley, but I was living in Modesto in the 70s because I was born and raised in Modesto, and I attended the first Modesto Community Hospice Volunteer Training, and I was just blown away by the beauty of the hospice concept. Although at that time I was a teacher by trade, didn't know anything about nursing or what was going to be hospice care, I loved the idea. And when Mary Jean Corbaran and Kathy Oberg invited me to become involved as a volunteer, and then later the coordinator of volunteers, I was just so happy to accept their invitation. So I've asked myself, now that Community Hospice is celebrating your 40th year, how did I get involved to begin with? And I remember that I had recently started a ministry to sick and elderly in my parish at Our Lady of Fatima Church. And Tony Tripp, who was a licensed clinical social worker, came and helped me train some volunteers at church. And I think it was from Tony that I learned about the first hospice training, and I just felt drawn. So I attended, and it's changed the course of my life, honestly, looking back those 40 years ago. In February of 1980, we accepted our very first patient. So our first patient was Vivian Adamson. I don't remember her age. She was probably in her 60s, I would say. But she agreed to be our very first. And I think of that. She was willing to let us come into her home, to trust us. She knew she was the first, and that honestly, she was going to be teaching us what to do, how to help her, how to support her. And the three of us, Mary Jean and Kathy and myself, we all went to her home the first day. Her husband Les was there. Her daughter Carol Brooks was there. And we talked, and we heard about her life. We heard about her illness. We laughed together as they shared fun family stories. And then Kathy and Mary Jean talked to Vivian about her illness, and then I talked to Carol about her fears, her concerns for her mom, their special needs. Early on, Kathy said that she and Mary Jean had decided this had to be about more than nursing care. This had to be about emotional, psychological, spiritual support, things that may be beyond or bigger than the scope of hospice nursing. And so they asked me to take on that role, and certainly later we had social workers and we had ministers involved, but early on it was just us. And we discovered, yes, there is a role to be just an ordinary human being, not a nurse, but someone who cared for their journey, who wanted to be part of it if they were willing to let us. And I visited the family often. I got to know Vivian and Les and Carol and Carol's children. Todd, I think, was her teenager, and I think Kelly was her little girl, watching her run around, playing, singing, all the while as her grandmother is getting sicker and weaker. But they were living and laughing and loving. And to be a friend, to help them however they needed that, to offer respite care if Carol and Les had an appointment, just we could see there was a role for people that were not in the medical profession. And from there, the volunteer program developed. So as the need developed, the next challenge, of course, was how are we going to find these volunteers? who's going to want to do this? But then I looked at myself and thought, I want to do this. This is adding meaning to my life. And so we offered the training. We advertised in newspapers and church bulletins, and by the second hospice training, I mean, we had 30 or 40 people attending. You know, there were teachers and undertakers and social workers and housewives and just, you know, pharmacists, people that were curious and felt called to do something to help with this inevitable stage of life that we're all going to experience. So over time, I was just so impressed with the quality of people that were interested in taking the training, that did dedicate those hours, make that commitment, that made themselves vulnerable. When you're talking about death and dying, it moves you. It confronts your own mortality. It's not offering to take baked goodies to a bake sale, which of course is wonderful, but this was a different kind of volunteer commitment. And people rose to the occasion, and they were brave and open-minded and humble and strong. So in the 70s, when the hospice concept was being introduced across the country, you know, it was brand new. Started in England. I think hospice in Connecticut was the first in the nation, and I believe that hospice of Marin was the second. And we were not too far behind, but people didn't know what hospice was. And the concept that the unit of care is not just the patient, the sick person, but the entire family was so novel and so lovely, really, because it genuinely is the case. And as that concept was accepted and understood, it's become an integral part of healthcare across the nation. And looking back, you think, well, my own children, I was talking to them about being interviewed today, and one of my daughters said, wow, it's just so accepted now. I never even thought about a time where there wasn't hospice care. And I like to think that now it is just accepted. And I learned that, the importance of it, in a very personal way when in 2013 my own sister developed a terminal illness. I was living in Carmel Valley. She was in Modesto still with her husband and her grown children, and I went over to visit. She was having a crisis in the hospital. It was clear she wasn't going to survive many more days, and the family was making choices, where to go, what to do. Her husband couldn't take care of her any longer. She had fallen, and someone said to my ears the magic word, well, what about the hospice? And by that time, Community Hospice had built I think it's the Alexander Cohen Hospice House. I'd never seen it. In my day, we could only begin to dream about something so wonderful. And so she was taken to the hospice. I was with her. I spent the night. We had wonderful conversations, the two of us, in her last days. And I realized that it all became full circle for me to have been part of its origin in Modesto and then to receive it so many years later. And as I said a few minutes ago, it really is about us as people taking care of us other people, and hospice was there for me and my family when my sister died, and I'm so grateful. It's a pretty spectacular experience to have the opportunity to talk to you about where community hospice is today, because when we began, all volunteers, handful of people, no money, but tons of passion and interest and enthusiasm. And all we cared about is just getting started. And I worked with the hospice in Modesto for 5 years, but in that short time, we had cared for 300 patients and their families, all in their homes, all free of charge, no Medicare reimbursement as yet, all funded by private and memorial donations. Could I have imagined that it would be what it is today? Never in my wildest dreams. That we had accomplished that then seemed miraculous. That it just in that short span of 5 years became an accepted part of the Modesto medical community is just phenomenal to me. And now hearing what it is today, it blows my mind and makes me very proud to have been in a small part at the beginning of such a beautiful and successful organization. I'm Trudy Murphy Dowd, and I'm a supporter of Community Hospice, and happy anniversary to all of you.